This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It gives me great pleasure this afternoon US time, to introduce the President of Utah State University. Professor Cantwell took up the role in 2023, an interesting time to take up the position of a President of the University, and I'm sure that you'll give us some insights into that. But as part of the ice-breaking process of our conversation, I invite each speaker to bring an object that represents their journey as a learner and a leader. So, Betsy, over to you.
So I'm going to describe, because I have a set of objects, and because I moved recently, they're packed, but I'll use my hands to show you something about them. So I keep a t-shirt archive, and it goes back, the earliest one, and it's about this big, is from the first Earth Day, which was April 22nd, 1972, I believe. And I was very young, but I went to school in Manhattan, in New York City, and we were let out of school for the day. And we went to a location where, in my mind, there were lots of people talking about the earth and preserving the earth. It was really a long time ago when you think about what our understanding and knowledge of climate change and climate adaptation is now compared to then. But that's the earliest shirt in my t-shirt archive. The next set of shirts that I have in my t-shirt archive are from the University of Chicago, where I went to college. And then we kind of segue into, I majored in psychology, but didn't stay there. So, and each t-shirt is a little bit larger than the first one. I worked for NASA for a number of years, and I have an amazing collection of mission t-shirts that are all related to missions that I worked on, one way or another. And from there, I went into work that was largely in the classified world. So no more t-shirts about the missions, no more really even t-shirts from the institutions, but I became very involved in institutions and organizations that were committed to science. So I have AAAS t-shirts, American Association for the Advancement of Science. I have t-shirts from the National Academies of Science. And then I moved into higher ed. So as you know, we're very fond of our t-shirts that we give out. So I have lots from the University of Arizona and Arizona State University, and then of course the University of Utah. I'm inordinately fond of my t-shirt archive. It really is better than anything I could say, for me anyway. It really reminds me of the pathway, which started with my recognition on the first Earth Day that there was this really interesting intersection of science and talking about science, being able to articulate what was going on and the impact on people. So this kind of three-legged stool, that hasn't been the hallmark of everything I've ever done, but I am to this day keenly aware of how much I need to talk about the things that I know about in order to have any impact on the world at all. So that is my object. It's a virtual object at this point. I wish I could show you all, because the size difference is amazing also as we get older. But some of those are just so near and dear to my heart. Missions that I worked on that were unbelievable, really unbelievable. And then every year the AAAS t-shirts are works of art. They're lovely, and they highlight all different aspects of science.
So if you look at those as a body of, in inverted commas, a body of knowledge, what do they tell you about your life?
High variability. I have 5 children, so I tell them often, some people are just they're born knowing what they want to do, and they do, and it's amazing to watch, but that wasn't me. I um I grew up in a time when and I think we'll get to this sort of thing when at least I knew that I could always get a job.
Hmm.
Um, so I wasn't focused on getting a job. I was focused on feeling like truly like I had a mission, like I understood that what I was doing with the work that I did had value. Um, and I started out in psychology and kind of segued into market research and then had a kind of an epiphany about wanting to work on in and on technology and have that be my life's work, which was the right choice. Um, but that, I think often about what are the threads through, if you are, I worked in an adoption agency for a number of years. If you are working with young women who are giving up their children for adoption, if you are working on satellites, if you are working with engineering students, if you are in the middle of a presidential role, which has more vectors of change coming at it than I think any other possible, uh, certainly leadership experience in this day and age. What's the common thread? And it is what I said earlier, which is the vital aspect is being able to draw the verbal thread in a narrative between what you know to be true um, about how you are doing the work you're doing and the people that you're interacting with. So if you're a scientist, you have to not only do the science, you have to get the money to conduct the science, and you have to have a team. Typically, you're not working alone. You have to know something about teamwork, and you have to be able to imagine, how am I going to share this so that it becomes knowledge that people know how to use? It's not just around the dinner table with your family. So that is the common thread, but I didn't really know it along the way.
So I'm interested in your epiphany, going from a behavioral science to technology,
Yeah.
and then engineering is a particular kind of technology. And then the work that you did with NASA, once again, is that sort of honing down your interest in technology, or was this just that, oh, that sounds interesting?
Well, it's a little bit more that sounds interesting, but I was also just so excited about finding out what you could do with sensors, for instance, and all the different kinds of sensors there are out there. Or uh, I would say 4 or 5 years, I worked on building life support systems for humans in space, and all the different ways you all the different you have to keep people alive with what they breathe. There has to be enough water. There have to be waste processing systems. So I always was really, and that actually very long time ago, I worked on the earliest versions of what were called at that time expert systems and are now really AI algorithms. Um, there was always so much that I could pull something new into the work that I was doing, and then that expanded to a whole new realm. I worked on laser-induced fusion. I worked on, and all of these came with, as an engineer, what was exciting to me was not the underlying, say, physics or biology. I worked on a lot of early technology for detecting viruses and things like that. Was how do we take all of these parts of knowledge that we understand and construct something really new and novel that does creates more knowledge about the world that we live in, has always excited me. Students actually, to me, feel a little bit black boxy like that. They are such, um, they come to us as human beings who want to learn something, but I always learn just as much, if not more. I'm a very, very big fan of when we have a constitutive problem in higher ed. Just let's use AI. That's one that I've taken to my students. How do we want to incorporate AI in our teaching and learning?
Mhm.
And we had faculty committees assembled, and we talked amongst ourselves. And I said, I just, I think our 20-year-olds may know more about this than we do.
Mhm.
Let's bring them to the table. Let's ask them not just how they think about it, but what would they like to see in their teaching and learning, in their classroom. It's been really, really interesting and illuminating.
And have they felt confident to come to the table to be candid, frank, and just push the boundaries?
Yes, typically my experience is you do have to do it right.
Yeah.
Um, but if you invite, well, in my world, we have plenty of students. So if you invite students, but other young people, if you're not in higher education, to actually work with you, they are hungry, hungry, hungry to do that. They do not want to just sit in a classroom and listen. It's the thing we see about our students are hungry to work with people in workplaces. And if our workplace is envisioning the next generation of teaching and learning, both technologies, classrooms, what are the learning outcomes, and we invite them to that table, they are awesome partners.
So what was your experience like as a student, both at Chicago, at Berkeley, where you did your graduate work, and even at Wharton, where you did your MBA?
Yeah, all a little bit different, but really what we would think of as that kind of traditional butts in seats model. I would say Wharton, which was in the early 2000s, was really breaking out of that mold. And of course, it was a business degree, but we had a lot of interactivity with people who were in the business world that we were, whether it was accounting or whatever we were looking at that time. I actually spent a lot of time studying real estate at that time. Um,
For personal benefit?
well, it turned out that was the only place I ended up using it. I had intended to start a company, and as a student of systems, and I think business is a really interesting system, I wanted to understand the system before I went out and started a company, and I had a really great business plan. And 9/11 happened, and I was still at that time working in the national labs. And I spent the next probably 5 years of my career deeply involved in the follow-on uh, activities associated with 9/11 and keeping our nation a little bit safer. Um, and then by that time I had 5 kids, and um, so we just did that for a little while longer, and I got talked into the idea, which I firmly believe, that higher education in the US is the most important national security mission that we have. These, training human beings to be the next generation of citizens is absolutely and more and more and more important.
And that sense of civic responsibility
Yeah.
and civic engagement, how do you incorporate that then into the student experience?
Yeah, and I think that's a really critical question right now. So we are surrounded by questions of everything from academic freedom to freedom of speech to lots and lots of questioning, political questioning of the social norms that we have. So we do uh, two or three things, but the one I'll point to at the moment, because we're bringing in our next group of speakers, is we just run a speaker series on kind of reimagining conflict. And we're bringing in a remarkable constitutional law judge for our next speaker. We address questions not just of I'll call that, the political aspects of conflict or even the national security aspects of conflict, but the moral aspects. Because giving permission to our student community to at least be to believe and think that the moral questions that are embedded in every one of the disciplines that you are studying are important, and you are allowed to have your own opinion about your perspective on that. I think is as important as anything else. So we do bring scholarship forefront. We are scholars. And one of the things we can do is bring scholarship, highlight scholarship, utilize scholarship, support scholarship very specifically in this moment. Around what does, I mean, just things like what does safety mean, but what are the moral, political um, imperatives right now? And how do you students want to think about it? How do we think about it? I will say I am a strong supporter of what in the US is called kind of institutional neutrality. And the lens that I think about that through is that as long as I keep the institution relatively neutral, that's a great platform for anybody on my faculty, anybody on my staff, or my students to have an unbiased by me or my institution um, perspective. So we don't want to get in the way of young people having their own viewpoint and getting, I think maybe to allude to something you asked about earlier, getting brave enough to enter into the conversation with the rest of us. They have a lot to bring to the table. They're growing up into, they're turning into adults in a very, very fractured moment in global history. And I think of that through the lens of the trust networks that we have created for a long time are breaking apart. Um, and they are the ones that are going to create the new trust networks. And that's a bigger job than I think they know they have, but they do. And certainly we are here to enable them, probably more than higher education has been for a long, long time. We need to enable them to create kind of these new paradigms that allow us to be more together as a species than we are apart.
So what I'm hearing you saying, and I certainly believe this, we are at an inflection point socially, technically, technologically, politically, and culturally.
Yes.
Somehow there's a role in higher education to bring that together so people can make sense of what's happening around them. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Exactly. Yes. You know, we're one of the few places left, meaning one of the few institutions dedicated to the support and encouragement of all voices. But that does mean we also have to support and encourage respect and uh, conflict that works, that doesn't, we all are in the same place. We come to the same, at least in my case, we come to the same physical location every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even if we're doing classes online, we are occupying the same space and we have to talk with one another and work with one another. Um, One could credibly argue that governments um, nominally still remain a place where that is uh, the paradigm, but a lot of governments are not fierce or as fierce as we are in defending these the the ability for all voices to have a place at the table.
Getting back to students, if I was a student coming onto your campus, and let's say I'm an undergraduate student, first in family student,
Yes.
would it be like for me as a student who didn't have the cultural capital from the family, who actually came from out of town? And I did postgraduate work in America, so I know what campus life is like in the Midwest.
Yep.
But what would it be like in Utah?
Well, Utah is fraught right now. But I would say, doing maybe a point counterpoint to what it was like when I was a student, um, our our we even have the same dorms, right, up that have been up for 50 years. Love to tear them down and create new ones, but the social networks inside the dorms are really different.
Mhm.
We don't have nearly as much what I would think of as maybe you could call extracurricular activity. There's plenty of it, but the time, this percentage of their time that our students spend uh, in a room playing games with one another, as opposed to in their own room looking at something on their computer, is much lower. So, and that certainly is reflected in more social anxiety,
Mhm.
just generally. Um, and we see that getting worse over time, not better over time on the part of our students. Um, I think for a lot of our students, that gets framed in their mind as a elevated level of anxiety about do I belong or not.
Mhm.
Um, we all worried about that as undergraduates, I think, at some level, but I think that is greatly heightened anxiety now. And if you are really a minority, meaning you are, nobody looks like you, or nobody speaks with an accent like yours, that is heightened even more. In Utah, we are a state that is very much looking at what are, if our trust networks are falling apart, this is my framework, not my state's necessarily, but if our trust networks are falling apart, what do we rely on socially?
Mhm.
The students are talking a lot about that, faculty, staff, and the university. Outside the university, I think there's a more strident discussion about how we should be, and maybe a little less tolerance for the people and the practices um, that aren't part of the kind of the Utah norm. Um, we're seeing that all over the United States. We are seeing that, and I think in a lot of other countries, I view that as driven by the fact that we don't know exactly what our trust networks are anymore. And so we fall back to really some old practices. So if I were a student of color, I would, and our students of color are amazing people who come to the table for us all the time to help us figure out how do we move forward, securing and supporting every single one of our students, and really having respect for everybody's perspective,
Mhm.
all of our students, and then kind of asking how do we put systems in place inside the context of the university that give everybody the chance to speak out about what makes them uncomfortable, but also have enough about what makes them comfortable so that they can do what we ask them to work pretty hard. We ask them to get a lot done. We put them under that kind of performance pressure for 4 years or more. And we do see, and this is not unique to Utah or my institution, but that all wells up in a lot more mental health challenges that young people are having. So here we focus a lot on how can we not just say we just need more mental health counselors, but how can we understand the kind of broad panorama of mental health challenges. So we are actually, this is where getting students involved, they typically don't want to talk about their mental health challenges, but they have a lot to say about what brings anxiety right now. And I think their voice and their perspectives are really important because if we assume that what somebody experienced 20 years ago is the same as it is today, we would be very wrong, particularly for anxieties. And then for our students that have the added load of being different than the average or not like everybody else in my dorm room, we have different types of support services. We just focus in. It is a one step at a time. I think none of us have the magic wand to fix this. But it's sort of heartbreaking to see the level of anxiety rise. One thing I will point to is our students more and more are becoming, peer supporters. So they are learning really early about mental health and bringing that to the way that they interact with one another. That's on the really like heartening side of how young people will move forward and be our next leaders. They will figure it out together.
I've been reading, my discipline is anthropology and sociology, so I'm a social scientist. Um, but I've been doing some reading on kindness
Yes.
and the value of kindness both to one's health, but also the value of kindness to institutions and organizations. How do you actually instill
Uh,
a disposition towards kindness at your level? And in many respects, from the top, you have an opportunity in some respects to shape that. But in fact, the responsibility is further down on the food chain.
it is. And my experience is that you don't instill kindness with lectures or even, here's a book I think you should read. You do it by demonstration, by modeling. We happen to live in a state where there is an enormous, so we're in a majority religion state, but where there is an enormous amount of religious work that we can draw on that has meaning for many of my students on that really focuses on kindness and to one another in your family, in your workplace. And so we're really in a culture where some of that we have a lot of stories to draw on that resonate with this community. I brought two really critical um, ideas to the speech I gave during my investiture, which was maybe a year ago. And one was kindness, and the other was faith. Not meaning religious faith, but the way that my faith is resides in my students and their ability to bring us all to a better world. Um, I think I model that in the words that come out of my mouth, the messages that I deliver, um, the I do a lot of videos. It's the thing. But really bringing uh, physical evidence of kindness. If I'm doing, I do podcasts as well. If I'm doing a podcast or a video, um, it has to be real. It has to be a genuine reflection of who I am. But I think for a lot of leaders in higher education, reflecting that kind of thing in the past would have been viewed as um, maybe either a weakness or certainly not something that you would show evidence of in your day-to-day interactions. And I actually seek that.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's really, really important for my students to see me as a person who believes that compassion is one of our most important leadership skills, and that leaders can and do show evidence of compassion.
Getting back to the students
Yeah.
and me walking around your campus, if I was talking to students, what would they say to me about student life and the programs that are offered at Utah?
So I think they would say, because I do sort of talk with a lot of students and we survey them a lot. Um, we are a relatively, in the scheme of things, happy campus. It's a stunningly, stunningly beautiful environment. I mean, and we are surrounded by the most incredible mountains. It's a very outdoorsy, beautiful campus. Um, and I think they would say that their undergraduate experience is really positive. But I also think they would say we could think about our curriculum with a little bit more of a lens towards the future and the skills they're going to need when they get out in the workplace. We are still, and we are thinking about this a lot. So we are sort of engaged in several redesign processes, but how how much should we be thinking about changing the Sage on the Stage model? You know, we have a 135-year-old campus. Many of our buildings are still old. They have not, they're now historic designation. They have not been replaced, but they were built for a much different approach to teaching than our faculty would like. So how do we, I mean, I think our students would all say, would love majority flipped classrooms, meaning in class, we are talking to one another, we're working in groups, we are doing projects together, and anything that we have to learn in a lecture modality, we're doing some other time because we're going to do work, we're going to do homework, we're going to do those kinds of things. I think we have huge enthusiasm for that. We also have a lot of enthusiasm for adding more online learning into just the general, not because our students want to be online learners. They very much value being here in person, but they would also like the opportunity to say, finish up faster so that their degree costs less by having more capacity to do a few of their classes online and to pick which ones they want to do that way. It is my experience that online learners, some resonate with, they do better learning math online than sitting in a classroom listening, watching someone on a whiteboard or a chalkboard. And others do better in an English class or a literature class. So getting the chance to choose a few ways that they can do online learning, and then many of our students work, so during the summer in particular, they can do their job, but get those credits in the evening. So they would ask us to look to the future just a little bit more from the curriculum and learning modality perspective. But the reality is that I'm just amazed at what a great undergraduate experience. We're not gigantic and we're not teeny weeny. Um, and we're beautiful and we have a lot of, if you live here as a student and you want to be a rock climber or a skier or pick your favorite outdoor activity, it is within walking distance.
Mhm. So let's get back to, you started to talk about some of the challenges in higher education. From Australia, we look at what's happening in America with great interest.
It can
Breathless.
be positive and it can be it's both ends of the table. You know, one of the biggest things right now is that universities no longer own knowledge,
Mhm.
right? We may have still some corner on trying to understand what's true, but you can go on a device and make a query and come up with an answer anytime you want to. So our value proposition is different. It is teaching you how to synthesize knowledge of a variety of kinds into some of the kinds of problems that societies have. We talked about climate change very early on. Um, so that change has brought a lot of differences in the things that we respond to.
We're also seeing politics that are very transactional. And I mean, the worst thing that could happen in higher education would be a purely transactional approach to learning scholarship. What will be the role in your institution to manage that possibility, which I don't think it'll happen, but you know, people become immune to alternative discourses sometimes.
We have uh, in my university, we have such a wide variety of places that we teach. So we have campuses all over the state of Utah, and some of them are live-in campuses, and small, some large. Some of them are commuter campuses. Some of them have a specialty. That's just how Utah kind of developed. What we have uh, perhaps the blessing to be able to do is some of our degree areas are very transactional, but not all of them. And we see an uptick in enrollment in the in-person live-in experiences. Um, I think there are a number of things that are driving that, but I think our students in America today, by the time they are finished with high school, do not feel ready for adulting. And
I'm still growing up.
there's, I don't know that they would characterize it as that, but they feel like they don't have enough experience. Some do need to go get a job right away to support their family um, or otherwise pay bills. Um, we like, so transactional forms of education can be very useful when you also have to work for
Yeah.
some period of time to get you to the place where you are ready to go do a few years of in-person live on campus experience and there's just teaming types of things you learn about. There are certainly social interaction things you learn about. You learn the basics of how to make sure you are, eating healthy, that you are managing your money appropriately, that all of the onslaught of the online world that can come at you, you know how to manage that and draw some boundaries around your own life. You know how to sleep well and how much you need and how to stay healthy. Um, Boy, I think as long as we offer multiple modalities, we will never see a complete lack of interest in the amazing experience you get from being an in-person student in a campus like ours. I don't have, my alumni are fierce. Not one of them says, "Oh, I wish I did it some other way."
Uh-huh. So 3 more questions. What advice would you give to the younger um, person that I'm talking to at the moment? What would you say, younger Betsy?
I would probably say trust your gut a little bit more. Um, I particularly remember being a young person and just feeling like I don't have enough experience. I don't I don't know enough yet. And the truth is you can get to any stage in life you don't know enough. And you're always making life decisions with imperfect information. Um, and it's really important to learn where your gut steers you in the right direction and where your gut steers you in the wrong direction. And the only way to learn that is to go with your gut. Maybe not take the biggest risk. Don't jump off a cliff, but learn that so that you know how to use and source yourself as a helper in the big kinds of thought processes and decisions we have to make in life. I wish I had come to that earlier.
Okay. And then, like when I was provost, I went to hundreds of graduation ceremonies. Um, and you see these young people full of excitement, full of promise, full of many opportunities. What advice do you give to the graduating class of 2025?
I think, and I give this advice to every graduating class, which is um, to remember and understand that you will be the leaders in sometimes in 10 years, but certainly in 20 years, you will be our leaders. And we have great faith that you will pick up that mantle and go with it, but um, that you don't wait for someone to inform you that that's going to be part of your role in life. Think about it right now. I have very serious students um, who take that seriously. And of course, they're ready to move on. They've just accomplished probably the biggest thing they've ever accomplished in their life.
Mm.
Um, and I also think that, well, it's not advice, acknowledging that huge accomplishment is solidly theirs sets the stage for them to know that they can do that. And because they'll have to do it again and again. But yeah, I have hopes and great faith for them.
Well, in fact, there's one other question, but that's right at the very end. What are you reading at the moment?
Oh, you'll like this. I brought this for you. Can you see what it's called? Lois on the Loose.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So this is about a young woman who rode a motorcycle from basically Alaska all the way down through the Americas to the tip of Tierra del Fuego. She's
Wow.
she's a little bit wild. She's British. Um, so this is her book about that trip. She met her husband on that trip. You don't, and this is, I read lots and lots of books about higher education, and I read lots of nonfiction about the world that we're in. But this is a great book. Written by a woman who probably didn't plan to be a writer. I don't think she's a writer now, but she does write for Bike magazine. How she had a moment in her life and just bought a motorcycle and headed out. Yeah, it's a really good book.
Well, I
A little
must
bit
get it.
adventurous,
Yeah,
right?
no, I'll definitely get it. Yeah. But look, there was another question that came up this morning when I was just refreshing myself about your life. And there was a great photograph of you walking, and you had your walking poles. You looked like a professional walker. So what is it about walking that sort of gets you out of the moment of the complex decisions that you make
Yes.
as a senior leader?
That is a great question, Judith. So I started my life as a runner, and I was never one of those runners. And I still don't understand why people just listen to things. I do actually. I know it helps some, but I was always a runner who just experienced the world I was running through. And then I can't run anymore. I ran too long and too far, and I destroyed my knees. So now I walk. But the same thing. It is a different way of immersing yourself in an entirely different. It's a non-intellectual environment. It's typically not a lot of, I don't, it's not a lot of voices. There's lots of noise. Might be birds, might be all kinds of things going on, but not voices. And so it really does actually pull my neurological self out of its usual framework into a different framework. I hope I am walking with my sticks until I'm the day before I pass away. It really is, it's probably performatively like meditation is for a lot of people, just neurologically making sure you still activate all those other senses and all those other capacities that you have that are not, and I love the intellectual world. It is so fulfilling for me, but it's also got its limitations.
Mhm. Betsy, I hope that you've enjoyed our
Oh,
conversation
this is lovely.
as much as I have. And even though it's unlikely, I hope that our lives do cross at some stage. And I wish you well, both as a leader and a learner, in a time that is a crossroads for all sorts of things internationally and for you locally.
It is. It is. Thank you so much for the opportunity. This has been delightful, and I hope our audience sees your podcasts as a way to gain just some insight and some thought processes on really important stuff that we are trying to do in higher education. We have a job to do everywhere.
And I think that what I also appreciate is it gives your staff and students an insight into Betsy.
Yes. Well, and they do enjoy that. Sometimes I just do videos that just really are more about, what flavor of ice cream do I like and things like that. So it's a very public person position.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.